Well, as we know, France is still reeling from that grotesque murder of a school teacher beheaded last week for showing his class cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad. And now President Emmanuel Macron says he's cracking down on Islamist extremism in his country. For more on this, let's turn to former UK MP George Galloway. So, George, police in France have conducted dozens of raids, arrested several people connected to this murder, and now the government says they are dismantling a Hamas-linked group called Sheikh Yassin Collective, which they say was directly linked to this killing. Will these measures actually be effective in weeding out extremism in France?
Well, you have to be careful that they don't turn out to be counter-effective, have the opposite effect that they are intended to have. And this seems like a bad start to me from President Macron. I'm all in favor of cracking down on fanatic Islamism, not just in our own countries, but amongst the fanatics that we are arming and funding and proselytizing for in other people's countries. And that's a fundamental flaw in the French position. France has been supporting the very same kind of people in Syria, for example, and in Libya for geopolitical purposes, whilst claiming to be cracking down on the very same people, oftentimes members of the same families, back in their own country. Frankenstein's monster was called a monster precisely because once you've built it, you can no longer control it. You cannot direct it to one place and be sure that it won't pop up in another. Now, the danger is the imagining that all Muslims look alike, that all Islamists look alike. This organization in France is not connected to Hamas, which is a Palestinian resistance movement, part of the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, by the way, I loathe the Muslim Brotherhood, particularly over their role in Syria. But by and large, the Muslim Brotherhood has never been involved in terrorism, and the danger of implying so is that you will drive all Muslims, particularly young and angry ones, into the terrorist camp rather than drawing them out of it.
Right, precisely like you said at the top, that this might be a counter-effective measure. And George, last night, Macron reportedly made a call to Russian President Vladimir Putin asking for his help in fighting extremism because this young murderer was a Chechen native. Now, the Russian government basically says, that the young man was not on their radar as he left the country as a boy with his family more than a decade ago. So my question to you is, could the young President Macron learn a thing or two from the Russians on how they handle extremism in their country?
Well, I'm sure that President Putin was far too polite to point out what I'm going to point out, which is this, that the French government allowed thousands, maybe tens of thousands, of Chechen Islamist fanatics into their country and gave them safe harbor and allowed them to continue their political organization, precisely because France and Britain and the United States find it useful to have anti-Russian elements like these Chechen fanatics under their control, they hope, they think, within their own countries. This is fundamentally flawed for the same reason I just referred to in Syria. The French government, perhaps more than the British, less than the Americans, has been in bed with the very same kind of people that carried out this horrific crime against Samuel Paty in full view of the school community. So France, Russia, Britain, and the United States should all be together in a new wartime alliance to defeat Islamist fanaticism on the battlefield, wherever they're fighting, and ideologically back in our own countries.
Yeah, the battlefield now has moved online, George. And on that note, the French government is also planning on creating a new criminal offense that never existed before that would punish anyone who endangers another by publishing their personal details online. It's a practice we would call doxing. Do you support that idea?
Actually, I do. Sorry to disappoint the more liberal or libertarian of your viewers, but I do, because I think that anyone who takes an action which can sensibly be imagined to lead to violence and terror against that person is not co-responsible in the sense of equally responsible, but they have contributed to the endangerment of someone's person and that person's family and home. So yes, I do support that. And I think these things are useful, but they are a distraction if that's all there is to it. There needs to be a much more holistic coming together of all of those, and that should be all of us who hate and fear and loathe and want to defeat Islamist fanaticism. The fountainhead of which, Manila, I remind you, is in Saudi Arabia, where Britain, France, and the United States have the warmest possible relations. Just imagine that.
Imagine that, George. And by the way, The Fountainhead, great book there. George Galloway, thank you so much for joining us.